we have learned so much in our last 5 sessions together, and we learned how to first draw the portrait of the head, and then with facial expressions and facial features. And then we learned how to learn from other artists, which is by copying, but not completely copying, just like taking the things that you like. And we also learned how to draw a half body portrait and then a full body portrait. And we learn about like, proportions, structure, shape, clothing, poses, and how to use references. So I think we're ready to draw our first comic together. And I'm gonna share my screen again. So that is exactly what today's lesson is about. So today we are going to learn how to draw a simple 4-panel comic using the characters you have created. So first, I will quickly introduce you to 4-panel comics, and I know that all of you guys know how to like comics here, but I'm going to show you some examples. So 4-panel comics are short and simple comics that have 4 panels, which are 4 square frames or rectangular. And generally, most 4-panel comics are funny and easy to understand for everyone. And 4-panel comics are most popular on the internet in the form of webcomics. So webcomics are basically short comics that you read on the internet. And many webcomics are slice of life webcomics, which are funny and relatable, and they're about a character with like facing everyday life situations. And here are some examples. So we have a black and white one by me, and then one with only one color, which is blue in the middle, and then this one with full color. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of time to read these 3 comics. Yeah, I see some reaction emojis. So hopefully all of you guys are done reading these comics. So how do you feel about these comics? Do you think they're funny? You can use the reaction emojis again to read for panel comics. You probably already know, but I'm just going to give a recap. So we start at the top left and then move on to the top right and then go over here to the bottom left and then to the bottom right. So it's like how you read a novel or a story with like text. So it's like left to right and then top to down. Then yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I never get any reading done. Yeah, if you have a cat, that's very relatable. Oh, and I also want to note that not all comics are read in the order, like the order that I just showed. Some comics, like mangas, they read from right to left, but we're drawing webcomics, and most webcomics are this way. So now you might remember that we talked about the comic creation process during our first lesson. So now we are going to revisit this because we're going to draw our first comic together. So the steps are story and dialogue. So we would decide that first before drawing, and then design our characters, which all of you have already done. And then we would add some expressions, poses, and gestures to our characters while drawing the comics. And then we would sketch it, and then ink it, and then color it, as always. So let's get started. First, we have story. And the story is one of the most important parts of comics. And story is what makes your comics funny, like the comics before. So you should always decide the story first, either in your head or writing it down on paper before you start drawing your comic. So have any of you heard of the story mountain before? I see some nods and some shakes. No? Okay. So a story mountain is basically how a story is structured. So when you read a story has like first has a beginning scene, right? And then something starts to happen. So maybe like a problem in the story or something dramatic. And then so that is the opening and then the build up, which is going up the mountain. So the tension is rising. And then at the top of the mountain, we have the climax, which is the big dramatic thing that happens in the story. And then we go down the mountain, which is when the problem gets resolved, and the ending, which is, the happily ever after. So a story mountain is basically this chart that you see on the slide that shows the structure of a story. So it's kind of like a general guide on how a story would be told. And the story in a 4-panel comic is a very simplified version of the story mountain. So a 4-panel comic is basically a very short and very simple version of the story mountain. So for 4-panel comics, we would still have the beginning, so the bottom of the mountain, so at the start over here. And in that part, we would set the scenery. So maybe you would draw some scenery, like maybe in a school or in your house. And then we would tell the readers what the story would be about. And then for the second panel, the story starts to develop. So something is starting to happen. And then at the climax, the very surprising thing or very dramatic thing suddenly happens, which is the very top of the mountain. And then at the end of the mountain, there's like the punchline of a joke. So maybe you would tell your joke there, and it ends in a funny or surprising way. So here are some examples using the simple version of the story mountain in 4-panel comics. And these are all comics that I drew on paper. And I'll give you some time to read. Hopefully you're done reading. If you're not, I'm going to start talking about it so you'll get it anyways. So this first comic is about me and my sister having matching sweaters. And we would wear these sweaters outside. So this first panel is the beginning of the story, where I tell my readers that we have matching sweaters. And then this one, the story starts, so something starts to happen. So we came back home after a walk. And then on this panel, the surprising thing happens, which is my dad saying, "What size is that?" pointing to my sweater. And then the last panel is the joke, which is that I'm actually wearing my sister's sweater, which is size 7 to 8, and it's way too small for me, but I didn't realize it. So this is something that actually happened, and I drew it in a comic following the story mountain. And then this next one is very, very simple, so I just doodled this on a sticky note. It's about my sister and brother again when they were very young. So here's my brother crying and like screaming or something, and that sets the scenery of the story. So the scenery is like my brother's crying. And then something starts to happen. So my sister is also crying, and she's crying like a river of tears. And then the surprising thing that happens is that I stick a Band-Aid on some knee, like one of their knees. And then the ending, which is the joke, is that right after I stick the Band-Aid on, they start to smile and they're not crying anymore. So the last one, and yeah, as Aurora mentioned in the chat, this is something that also actually happened to me, and I drew it in a comic. So the first one is just the scenery of the story, which is me talking to someone, and someone saying, "Have a nice day," and I'm saying, "You too." And the next one is the person saying, "Happy holidays," and I'm like, "You too," again. And the third one, the surprising thing happens, which is the person saying, "Happy birthday," and then I say, "You too," as well. And then the last one is a joke, which is my very oh no expression. So those are examples of my comics that follow the story mountain. And they're very simple. They don't have to be too complicated, but yeah. And yeah, realization. That time I was like, oh wait. So yeah. And also a tip on making your comics funny is to look at your personal experiences. So think of something funny that happens to you in your real life. And here are some more comics from other artists that also use the story mountain and also use humor. So this one's by C. Cassandra. She's waking up with her blanket on, and it's very normal. It's just a scenery of her on her bed. And then she's eating breakfast with her blanket on, which is kind of unusual, so something starts to happen. And then on the third panel, we see that she's also showering with her blanket on. And then the third panel, which is the joke, here she has her blanket on at her bus stop. And these other people are looking at her like, what? And then this one, there's no dialogue. It's very simple, but it still follows the story mountain. So C. Cassandra's tying her hair, and then she's tying it up. So that is kind of going up the mountain. And then she finished tying it. Yay, it looks very clean. Woohoo. And there's some sparkles over here. And then her hair just pops up. So that's like the punchline of the joke. And then we have Benny and Boone. I think some of you have seen this before. So this is this big bear and the small bear carrying some wood, which is the scenery of the story, so we know what's going on. And then the bear trips, which is something that starts to happen. And then this big bear says, Benny, you should take 2 trips. And then Benny's like, no, thanks, 1 was enough. So if you get it, it's kind of like a pun, or not a pun, but like some wordplay over there. So you can make jokes in your comics by like looking at your personal experiences, or you can use like pun, like in the Benny and Boone comic, or you can use dialogue, like the Benny and Boone one. And now we will talk about dialogue next. So dialogue is basically the text in the comic that helps show your story. So it can be a conversation between 2 or more characters, or even one character talking to themselves. So I'll also give you some time to read over here. So these are all comics that have dialogue in them, which are the text in the speech bubble that shows that a character is talking. So in this first one, C. Cassandra is talking to her friend about a cute hoodie that she just brought, and her friend's like, ooh. And C. Cassandra's like, it has pockets. And then she tries to stick her hand in the pockets, and then she finds out that they're fake pockets. And this also happened to me before. Oh, what is the middle one supposed to be about? Okay, so this one, the boy is saying, there's a dialogue here. The boy is saying, whoa, are you a genie? And then the genie pops up. And then the genie's like, I'm the corn dog genie. I grant you 3 wishes, but you can only wish for corn dogs. And this guy's like, okay, I guess I'll take a corn dog. Oh, someone's coming in. Hi, Jan. So today we are looking at 4-panel comics. And I've just talked about a story. So it's a 4-panel comic is like a very simple story. And now I'm talking about dialogue. So I'm going to continue with the middle comic here. You can take some time to read while I talk. So then this boy's like, okay, I guess I'll take a corn dog. And then, like, thanks. Takes a corn dog and is like, thanks. And the genie's like, you have 2 more wishes. So the joke is that the genie only has 3 corn dogs that he's holding. And he's like, I am a genie. But then, yeah, exactly. He's hiding 2 more corn dogs behind his back. Yeah, exactly. He's a fake genie. That's the joke. And then the last one is called Forgotten Thing. So it's this girl again. I think, yeah, this is her name. And she's like, I should tell that person about that one thing. And then that person comes. He's like, so what did you want to talk about? And she's like, the thing. And there's some silence over here. And then she was like, what was the thing? So she forgot about the thing. And yeah, it's so relatable. Yeah, Aurora. So those are some more funny comics that also use dialogue. Now let's move on. So something very important while you are writing dialogue is speech bubbles. So the order of the speech bubbles and the direction of the speech bubbles and the shape of the speech bubble can show a lot about your comic. So let's first talk about the order of the speech bubbles. So let's go back to the slide for a bit. So speech bubbles in comics, they read from top to down and left to right, just like how you read text, like in a book. So for example, in this one, you will read this first speech bubble before the second one. So you wouldn't read this ooh one first. So that is basically the order of speech bubbles. And speech bubbles also have a tail attached to them, as you have seen. So this tail is used to show who is talking. And the tail will always point to the mouth of the character that is talking. So like for example, here this tail is pointing to this boy, and here this tail is pointing to this girl. So now, there are also many types of speech bubbles. So here you can see there's this normal speech bubble that is everywhere. And then we have this one that is yelling. So it's very sharp and there are like pointy edges to show that it's kind of like an explosion, like someone suddenly yelling. And this one with the wavy lines, it shows weak or fading speech, like that. And then this one with the dotted lines, it shows whispering. And then this one with the thinking bubble, it's like daydreaming or thinking. And some artists will also use a black speech bubble to show negative emotions, like something very dark that just happened. So those are some common types of speech bubbles. And that is all about dialogue. And one thing to note is that comics generally don't use too much dialogue because a comic can show a lot just using the expressions and body languages of the characters. This leads us to the next part of a 4-panel comic, which are expressions and gestures for your characters. So from our previous lessons, each of you have already designed your own characters, and we also learned how to add facial expressions and body languages or gestures to our characters. And now here is how to apply that to comics. So here are some more example images. This first one is also about C. Cassandra, and then she's lying here on her sofa, and then someone says, "Psst, hey." And then her toe says, "I'm cold." And there's a hole in her sock. And the last one is just a panel of her, what's going on expression. So that is how much expression can show and how expressions can make your comics so much funnier. And then this one, we have this gesture over here. So this is C. Cassandra waving away her flies. And then this is someone else saying, "Oh, why is there so many flies?" And then this is like a very crazy gesture over here. So yeah, you can exaggerate a lot when you're drawing your comics. And then there's this evil banana here that's attracting all the flies. This one is another comic by me and also about my sister. So we're eating chips, and then I'm saying, "I'm going to the washroom, don't finish the chips." And then my sister's like, "Okay, I won't." And then later, so here you can see my sister's over here, and she's kind of doing this pose. And even though there's no dialogue, you can clearly see that she is secretly eating her chips. So sometimes you don't even need dialogue for your comics because the expressions and gestures can show a lot. And yeah, on the final comic, I'm like, "Where are all my chips?" And she's like that. Oh, so that is about expressions and gestures. And they can show a lot about a character's personality, and they can show a lot of humor, which makes your comics funny. And yeah, comic artists can also use some symbols to show their expressions. And we already talked about this before. So for example, some lines over here, some rays to show surprise, and some maybe a question mark to show confusion, and an exclamation mark to show surprise again, and and hearts to show love and things like that. So that is our lesson about 4-panel comics. So to summarize, we first learned about the story, which is like a story mountain, and it goes from beginning, setting the scenery, to the big dramatic surprising thing that happens, and then it kind of get resolved in a funny or surprising way because this is a 4-panel comic. And we also learned about dialogue. So there are many types of speech bubbles. And then we also learned about expressions, which is very important to show emotion and humor. And we also learned about gestures, which does the same. So I hope you had a lot of fun reading those comics. And there are a lot more on the internet if you all like to read webcomics. Now, today's workshop is, of course, to create your very own 4-panel comic. Before we get started, I'll give you a general guideline. So first, brainstorm ideas for your story. So you can take a piece of paper and kind of plan out what your story is going to be about and start to think about the story mountain. And a tip to come up with ideas is to observe from your everyday life. So like I've said before, think of some random funny thing that happened to you, maybe with your family or your friends, or things that happen at school or maybe while you're traveling. And whatever happened, you can write that down and turn it into a very funny comic. And I always do this because I always bring like a notepad with me. And then sometimes when something funny happens, I'll just quickly write it down. And then when I get home or when I have time, I'll draw a comic about it. So anyways, once you have your story, you can go on and draw 4 square panel lines. So like a little grid. And also make sure to use a ruler so the lines are straight. And then after that, you can start to create a light sketch, and you can use reference photos and observe from your everyday life if you need that. And then add some details, ink, and color, as always. So now I think it would be very fun if we can do the first step together. So if we can brainstorm some ideas together. So like I said before, you can think of funny stuff that happened in your life, or even at Jazz Fun Comic Club. So for example, like the 2 heads thing that happened last session. So I accidentally said 2 heads instead of something else, I forgot. But yeah, I said 2 heads, and then later on in the chat, I'm like, shh, don't tell anyone I have 2 heads. So yeah, that could be turned into a comic. And something else that happened to me is, like, once I was in my backyard, and I was trying to climb the fence for some reason. And then I was on the fence, and then I was holding, like, I was, like, kind of, like, keeping myself stable, holding onto the fence. And then I like, felt something mushy under my hand. So then I lifted my hand to look, and there was raccoon poop on the fence. So I touched raccoon poop. And yeah, I turned that into a comic, which is right here. And something else that happened to me, so I'm just thinking about that, is I think once we were traveling, me and my family, and then my sister, who was right there on camera, so my mom was taking a picture of her, and her hair was in the wind, and it was like very like pretty and smooth and stuff. And then I also tried to do that same pose, but then the wind, my hair got into my face a lot. So those are some random things that happened to me, just to give you some ideas. And you can even think of things that happened at school. So maybe with your friends, or maybe while you are doing homework, or during recess, or whatever. But you all can get started drawing your comics now. And I'll also draw with you, so I'll be right here. And I can't wait to see what you all come up with, because it's going to be very fun to look at each other's comics. And when you're done, you can post it on Google Classroom for everyone to see and laugh. So yeah, now let's get started.